So I'm getting some questions on these diesel trucks, and sometimes they're a little hard to answer because I don't have enough information on them. I'll use this one as an example. I won't mention any names, but it's a good question. Pull it up here. So this person asked me, it says here I have a slight engine skip that's intermittent. An engine skip would be a misfire. All new injectors, new fuel pump, which would be the high pressure oil pump, new fuel lift pump, and new injector harness. And then asked, could it be the IPR ICP? So, you know, my first question is, what's the date of manufacture? Is it an early truck, you know, that has the inferred exhaust back pressure where it needs to, you know, the VGT has to learn, got to go through a little learning process, or is it an interim truck in between that truck and the 05, you know, 04, I think, August of 04, and then the next version of the engine came out with the piston pump. I mean, I don't know that. How many miles does it have on it? Did it have this problem before? Obviously it had some sort of misfiring issue going on because we replaced the injectors, the high pressure pump, and fuel lift pump, and the injector harness. So I'm suspecting that this problem showed up after. You know, this is a completely different problem that we're having now, and it was after all of this. So my initial thought is that, well, it's an injector. You know, how do we know it's an injector? Well, we don't know that, but we have nothing else to go off of here. We don't even know if it has any codes. So basically what I'm saying here is that, you know, the best advice I can give you is how I would approach this if you brought me this truck. I'm going to quiz you on when does it do it? Going down the highway, steady state, you know, after you go down the highway, pull up to an, you know, idle, and it starts misfiring. You know, those are the kind of questions that I need to know. And you know, then I need to know, since it is misfiring, I need to know which cylinder is misfiring. And the only way I can do that is I need an enhanced scan tool. You know, I need to be able to look at the power balance, look at the misfire data, current and history, which most enhanced scan tools will do. Snap-on is probably the best at that in my opinion, but this one does an okay job. I know I complain about this launch tablet all the time, but you know, I'm still using it. So might be a little out of people's justification and price range. You know, it's $1,000. Sometimes you can get them for less if somebody has a special going on, but really, if you're gonna, for a do-it-yourselfer in this kind of a situation, you need to know which cylinder is misfiring. And if it's not meeting the threshold for flagging that cylinder, you don't know which cylinder is misfiring, because it has to misfire a certain amount of times per cycle, and I don't know how many rotations of the crankshaft that is, but it has to, before it'll flag that cylinder. The other thing is too, new injectors, they could have an issue. You know, you could have a coil issue or an issue up here in the stator body somewhere with the spool valve, or could even be a mechanical issue. You know, when it gets hot, it's not putting out the right amount, you know, any kind of a scenario like that. So on these injectors, on the 6.0, unless you have a completely, a fully shorted or a fully open circuit on these, it won't flag a circuit code. And like I said, it won't flag a contribution code unless it meets the threshold there. So assuming that it's not doing that, then I'm going to need to take my scan tool out, and I'm going to need to look at the power balance, the current, and the history of misfires, and see, you know, which cylinder or cylinders are misfiring. As far as the injection control pressure sensor goes, if you're having an issue with that, generally it's going to be you know, it's going to be like if you looked at it on a graph or with a scope, which would be even better, because then you're looking at it, actually looking at it when it's happening. You know, if you have a sawtooth pattern going on that thing, you know, intermittently, the PCM is going to interpret that as a circuit code, so it's going to set a code. So If you don't have any codes there, I wouldn't worry about that. Crank position sensor can cause a misfire, like if you had an erratic signal due to a botched bed plate replacement where they damaged that tone ring on there, it can come loose. And I've seen this a couple of times where you would have an intermittent misfire. It was pretty consistent, but it would be intermittent. You know, you'll have an erratic signal on there that can cause the engine to skip or misfire. So, but it will set a code. The only thing that won't set a code, like I said, is fully open or fully closed or fully shorted circuit in the injector circuits. That's the only way these are going to set a code, other than a contribution code. So if it's internal to the FICM, it's going to set. You're going to have a whole boatload of codes in there for circuits and you know, performance codes, FICM performance. So you need to know all of that information before you even, you know where to start. So you need to figure out which cylinder is misfiring, or cylinders, and the only way you can do that is if you have an enhanced scan tool where you can look at that data and look at the power balance. Different tools are better for doing a power balance than others. Like the Autel, the power balance is terrible. It isn't filtered enough to where, you know, I mean, that thing's just going all over the place when you rev the engine up. With the Snap-on and even with this, it's filtered, so you're not getting all that nonsense going on. You know, it's like on the Snap-on, if your cylinder starts misfiring, the line just starts dropping. You'll see it drop, you know, steadily or whatever. It'll drop down to a point, and it may only stay there, you know, intermittently, like this person's problem here. But at least you'll see it, and then you can go back and look at misfire data and look at the history and the current, and you could actually just monitor the current and record it, you know, because you can't sit there and look at the scan tool the whole time, and you know, you can see which cylinder is misfired. So once you determine which cylinder is misfiring, then you can focus in on cylinder number 4 or whatever, you know, if it's just one cylinder. And what I would do at that point is, even though I have new injectors, because I'm suspecting an injector, I would make sure your harnesses are snapped in on your FICM, because sometimes, you know, the little locking tabs get weak on them, or they're missing, somebody broke them off, and that thing will work its way out. Usually you're going to have more than one misfire, more than one problem when that happens, but you know, you could have a connection issue there. Make sure that's tight. You know, once you've established the integrity of your connections there, then you know, like I said, what I would do, I have injectors around here. You know, I have the benefit of having known good injectors. You know, throw new O-rings on them and a new washer on them, and put them in, and then I can go do the same test drive, and if that fixed it, great. You know, that's tossing apart, but at this point, you know, I really have no choice. So, and it's, you know, it's the quickest thing that I can do to get me to the result that I'm after. So, you know, and if that isn't it, then I'm going to be looking for, at that point, I'm going to be looking for possibly a mechanical issue, you know, like maybe a valve issue, a bad valve guide from an aftermarket air filter. You know, it'll just, you know, when it starts sucking dirt in through the system, it's just, you know, it's blowing it right at that valve stem, you know, when the valve's open, and, you know, it gets up there and wears that guide out. It could either be seizing in the guide, or maybe the valve might be walking around a little bit occasionally. I've seen on a 6.4 where I had an intermittent misfire, and, you know, sometimes you had to drive it quite a ways to get it to, you know, before it would start misfiring, and this one actually flagged a misfire. But what it turned out to be is it was a bad roller on a lifter. The lifter apparently had lost some needles in it. Why they didn't go through the oil pump, I don't know. But sometimes it would rotate on there, but sometimes it would come around and it would get stuck on there, and then the valve wasn't opening far enough. You know, so it would cause that cylinder to misfire. And I've only seen that particular scenario happen once, but you know, you never know what you're getting into. So first you got to determine which cylinder it is. then you can start looking at this, start looking at mechanical but the best, quickest, dirtiest way I know, once I've established cylinder, is I'm going to pull the injector out, toss one of my known good ones in there, and then I'm going to test it again. And like I said, if it still does the same thing, then you're going to continue on. But as far as there being for a misfire, as far as there being a silver bullet, you know, you need all of this. You need this information. You need this data to determine your path. There's no, shooting from the hip. That's really expensive. To go through and start changing, tossing more injectors at it or whatever. So you really need a good quality, high end, and I consider this a high end homeowner tool, because I know I use it professionally, but I have other tools. So when this one pisses me off real bad, I'll go grab something else that I know works. So anyway, this would be an awesome tool for a homeowner, a do-it-yourselfer to have, because there are other modules on the truck, that give you trouble. You got your restraint control module, you got your freaking ABS module, and those things have problems, and you need to be able to look at that stuff too, because you might lose a wheel speed sensor, ABS lights on, you might lose your speedometer, who knows? You need to be able to look at the cluster, the ABS, the restraint control, even the trailer brake controller in those trucks, heater. If you have the electronic heater controls, that kind of stuff gives you the ability to look and do tests and look at the data on those modules too. So a high-end homeowner tool like this Launch Pro 3S Plus tablet is, they'll probably get mad at me for saying that, but basically that's what I consider it, that, because there are tools that are more capable. I mean, if you're talking a Snap-on scan tool, I consider that, and Snap-on is a corporation and a company. I hate Snap-on to death, but their scan tools, their graphing on their scan tools, I mean, they really built that tool to help me, so it's just a great tool, but most homeowners aren't going to be able to afford that. I mean, you could probably buy a used one for about what I paid for this, which probably wouldn't be a bad idea if you were real serious about fixing your own stuff. But this particular problem here is not, you're not going to be able to solve it without a scan tool. You need that data, you need that misfire data, you need to zero in on that cylinder that's having the problem. And I consider the 6.0, it's old technology. I mean, it was new at the time, but it's old technology. On these newer trucks, 2019, 20, 21, 22, 23s, and 2013s, 14s, you have so many more bidirectionals and so much more data there that you can look at, so many more tests. They may not be official tests, but they're tests that I use, from the driver's seat, to be able to determine which cylinder's misfiring and get a good idea of why it's misfiring, just by looking at data, and maybe do a couple of tests, shut off the quantity adjustment, compensation, and all that, and that can lead you down the path that you want to go. But for the homeowner, this is a good tool. If you do buy a tool, you can go to Harbor Freight and buy a good Autel or something like that that'll give you those abilities, and then you can fix your, it'll lead you to the problem. So if you're a technician, you should have a good tool. I mean, I don't know if I'd recommend this particular tool here. I'd probably recommend an Autel for a technician, somebody that wanted to do this professionally. But for the homeowner, this would be great. This would be awesome. A little bit expensive, but if you're going to be a do-it-yourselfer, it's going to give you the ability to look at all modules, and you're going to have all the bidirectionals that you should have, and you'll be able to do most of your own repairs if you want to. Why anybody would want to work on these, I have no idea, because I don't even want to work on them anymore. But that's a good tool for you to do that. And as far as this particular problem that this person is having, that's how I would approach it, and by golly, I would fix it. So hope you learned something, and thanks. So clearly we have injector number 5, but if you'll notice, if I'll go ahead and disable the fuel compensation strategy, but you'll see everything else is above the line, trying to compensate for that. Let's see what happens when we hit. Okay, we disabled that. Yeah, that brought it down a little bit. But let's take the load off of it, put it in park. I'm still suspecting number 1. It's above 0 right now, as all the rest are. But something is going on with number 1. It's not showing up now. But when you accelerate, I mean, you can feel a vibration in it when you put the power to it. And of course, it's not going to show up on the power balance when you're in the throttle like that. But I'm suspecting we also have something wrong with number 1. Let's check our codes here. Let's see. Exit. Codes menu. See if we got anything. Well, we've got cylinder 5 contribution and balance. So, nothing for number 1 though. So I guess what we need to do, our next move is going to be, there's no electrical circuit codes though. So one thing that but that's not always the case on these. Sometimes you can have a circuit issue and it won't code, you know, so why that is, I don't know. So what we need to do, let's go in and well, it's clearly misfiring right now. I can feel it. So I guess we could do a, now that isn't going to do us any good. What we'll do is we'll go in there and we'll play with the harness real quick. From the fickum all the way back, you know, bend it, twist it, poke it, do all that kind of stuff to it, and we'll see if it, if our misfire changes or goes away. So let's go do that.